It had been a long day driving my truck through the lonely roads of Canada. The vast expanses of forests and mountains were lost on the horizon, and my only company was the radio and the sound of the engine. Around midnight, I decided to take a detour that seemed to lead to a rest area, a perfect place to spend the night before resuming the journey at dawn. However, as I drove along that road, the forest became thicker and darker. The faint glow of my headlights barely pierced the blackness around me. A low, guttural sound broke the silence, coming from somewhere far away. Instinctively, I slowed down. I thought it might be a bear or some other wild animal. But what I heard next was not the growl of a bear, but a piercing, terrifying scream that reverberated through the forest, making my skin crawl. The truck seemed to waver for a moment, as if something had hit it from the side. Terrified, I accelerated, trying to get out of the place, but the road was getting narrower and uneven. Tree branches brushed the sides of the truck, creating a chilling sound. That's when I saw it. In the middle of the road was a gigantic creature, at least 10 feet tall. Its eyes glowed with an intense yellow hue, and its body was covered with thick, dark fur. What struck me most were its enormous feet, reminding me of the Bigfoot legends I had heard as a child. With my heart pounding in my chest, I slowed to a stop a few feet away from the creature. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or think clearly. The beast, with an expression of curiosity rather than aggression, began to slowly approach the truck. Not knowing what to do, I honked the horn loudly, hoping to scare it away. The creature paused for a moment, tilting its head as if trying to understand what was happening. However, instead of walking away, it let out another deafening scream and slammed the hood of the truck with unearthly force, causing the vehicle to shake violently. With fear gripping me, I put the truck in reverse and accelerated full throttle, trying to get away from this nightmare. The creature tried to follow me, but its speed was no match for the truck. I don't know how long I drove in that madness, but when I finally emerged from the forest and reached a main road, dawn was already breaking. I parked the truck on the side of the road, shaking and trying to process what I had experienced. The next day, at the nearest gas station, I told my story. Most of the locals were skeptical, but one old man, with wrinkles marked by time, stared at me and nodded. He said that there were legends in the region about a creature that lived in the deepest woods, and that some truck drivers, on particularly dark nights, had had encounters similar to mine. Since then, I always avoid driving the lonely roads of Canada at night. And although many don't believe my story, I know what I saw, and the terror I felt that night will never leave me. The roads are quite mysterious, especially at night. It was my first time driving on the old mountain road that connects the small towns in the Sierra. Although the local stories of disappearances on that route made me uneasy, I had no choice. The main road was closed for maintenance. As I made my way deeper into the mountains, the narrow road twisted like a snake through the tall pines, and the fog began to roll in, reducing my visibility to just a few meters. The radio, which had been rebroadcasting an old song program, began to fill with static until a whispering voice cut through the silence. "You shouldn't be here." I turned the radio trying to find another station, but the voice persisted. "Turn around, before it's too late." Alarmed, I turned off the radio. The darkness and fog combined, creating eerie shadows that played with my mind. I decided to speed up. I wanted to get out of that stretch as soon as possible. I drove over an old suspension bridge that crosses a deep ravine. Halfway across, the truck's lights flickered and the engine died briefly. I turned on the hazard lights and tried to start the engine again. On the third attempt, it came back to life, but I noticed something in the rearview mirror that made my blood run cold. A silhouette was standing at the start of the bridge, watching me. I tried to convince myself that it was simply a local or someone in need of help, but something in the figure's posture told me otherwise. He didn't look human. It was too still, too dark, as if it were made of shadow itself. The truck finally started and I accelerated, but the figure began to move toward me at an impossible speed. The fog intensified, and the shadow seemed to come alive, surrounding the truck as if trying to trap me. With my heart pounding in my throat, I remembered an old shelter a few miles away. If I could make it there, I could hide and wait for daylight. With that thought in mind, I pushed the gas pedal to the metal, praying that the engine wouldn't let me down. The figures seemed to be everywhere, appearing and disappearing through the fog and shadows. One moment, I could have sworn I saw her sitting in the passenger seat, staring at me with vacant eyes. But the next instant, she was gone. I reached the shelter, jumped out of the truck and slammed the wooden door of the place. I hid in a corner, listening. All was silent, except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. The night passed slowly, with every noise from the forest making me jump. But dawn finally came, and with the light of day, the terror of the night before seemed to fade. When I finally emerged from the shelter, I found an old pendant affixed to the rearview mirror of the truck, an amulet of protection from the natives of the area. An elder from the nearest village later explained to me that the road was cursed and that the figure was the spirit of a trail driver lost years ago. From that day on, I never drove that road again. And the pendant, I never parted with it. Because although many do not believe my story, I know that that night, something beyond this world was about to take me away. Continuing with more terror, the following story will leave your hair standing on end. Driving through the vast plains of the middle of the country, I was always drawn to the vastness of the landscape and the freedom of the road. That night, however, everything changed. I had been traveling for hours, guided only by the stars and the dim lights of my truck. As a light rain began to fall, the reflection of the wet pavement began to tire my eyes. I decided to stop at an abandoned gas station that loomed on the horizon. Although it was in disuse, the place seemed suitable to rest for a while. Once parked, I settled into the booth and closed my eyes. It didn't take me long to fall asleep, but a knock on the window startled me awake. I looked through the fogged glass, but saw nothing. I assumed it was the wind or some animal, so I tried to go back to sleep. However, I had barely closed my eyes when I heard the knock again. This time it was louder, more insistent. I turned on the truck's lights, illuminating the surrounding area, but there was nothing and no one in sight. Just as I was beginning to calm down, the truck's radio turned on by itself. It scanned for frequencies automatically, cycling through different stations until it stopped on one that only emitted static. A raspy, distant voice became audible through the white noise. "You shouldn't be here." Panic seized me. I tried to start the truck, but the engine wouldn't respond. The radio was still emitting that voice that now repeated the phrase over and over again, each time more and more intensely. Suddenly, the truck's lights went out and I found myself plunged into absolute darkness. I felt something clinging to the door of the truck, as if hands were trying to open it. I held onto the steering wheel, praying that the door wouldn't give way. Then the voice on the radio changed tone, taking on a mocking quality. "We own you now." Just as I felt the door about to open, the truck's lights came back on by themselves. The surrounding area was empty. The radio had returned to its original silence, and the engine was purring softly, as if nothing had happened. I accelerated away from that gas station as fast as I could, and didn't stop until I saw the first lights of dawn on the horizon. Later, in a roadside bar, an old trucker told me about the abandoned gas station. According to him, many years ago, a group of truckers disappeared without a trace in that very spot. It was said that their souls still haunted the area, looking to take any intruder who dared to stop. Since that night, I vowed never to drive on that road again. And every time I pass a gas station, I get a shiver, remembering the night I was about to join those lost-in-time trail riders. Let's finish this little compilation with this last story. Ever since I was a kid, I was always fascinated by stories about Route 39, a desolate and deserted road that went through a series of ancient tunnels built into the mountain. The stories said that, years ago, an accident in one of those tunnels had left several truck drivers trapped and dead, and that their souls still haunted the place. Of course, I always believed that these stories were urban legends, inventions of people to scare each other. Until it was my turn to walk through it. It was a cold, moonless night, and I had to deliver a shipment to the other side of the mountain. Route 39 was the fastest way. Everything was going well until I reached the entrance to the first of the tunnels. For some reason, my radio started emitting static and my headlights flickered a couple of times before going out completely. I pulled out my flashlight and continued at a slow pace, relying on the meager glow it emitted. As I advanced through the tunnel, I could hear whispers. Distant voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Help us, you shouldn't be here," they said. I sped up, trying to get to the end of the tunnel as quickly as possible. But as I advanced, the voices became louder and clearer. My flashlight revealed fleeting shadows crossing the road ahead of me. At one point, I felt as if someone was sitting in the passenger seat, and when I shone the flashlight there, for a brief second, I saw the pale, sad face of a man, who disappeared almost immediately. I panicked. I knew I had to get out of that tunnel. Just when I felt my sanity was on the edge, I emerged on the other side. The truck's headlights came back on, and the radio went back to normal, as if nothing had happened. I stopped for a few minutes to catch my breath. It was then that I noticed a small amulet hanging from the rearview mirror. It wasn't there before. It was a cross made of bones with a small inscription that read, "Thank you for not forgetting us." I never took Route 39 again. The legends I used to dismiss had become a chilling reality for me. Now, every time I see the amulet, I remember the souls lost in that tunnel and the brief moment our lives intersected in the darkness. They didn't send another story, and we didn't want to leave her out. I hope you enjoy this last story. It was early morning when I found myself driving down an unfamiliar road in the northern part of the country. I had been assigned an urgent delivery, and the GPS had selected the fastest route, though not the busiest. The road was surrounded by dense forests and shadowy mountains loomed on the horizon. With every kilometer I drove, I felt a growing sense of isolation. The road signs were worn and corroded by time, and I hadn't seen another vehicle in hours. It was then that I noticed a strange pattern. The signs indicated the same distance to the next town, Luzerne, 20 kilometers, no matter how long or how far I had traveled. Intrigued and concerned, I consulted my physical map, but there was no mention of a town called Luzerne. Just as I was considering turning back, I saw the lights of a gas station in the distance. As I approached, I noticed that everything in that station seemed to have stopped in time. The fuel prices were displayed in a currency no longer in use, and the parked vehicles were decades-old models. Nevertheless, I decided to stop and refuel. As I was filling up, an old man came out of the building. He had pale, wrinkled skin and was dressed in shabby clothes. "It's strange to see someone new around here," he commented in a voice that seemed to come from far away. "I got lost," I admitted. "I'm trying to find my way to the next town." The old man smiled in a way that chilled my blood. "Everyone who comes to Luzerne is trying to find their way." Confused, I told him I was simply looking for a route to deliver my cargo. "You'll have to spend the night here." "No one leaves Luzerne after dark," he muttered. My instinct screamed at me that I should leave. I quickly paid and returned to my truck. But when I tried to start it, the engine didn't respond. After several failed attempts, I looked toward the station and realized that I was no longer alone. Several figures were approaching, all with the same pallor and vacant look as the old man. In an act of desperation, I jumped out of the truck and ran into the woods. I could hear their whispering voices behind me, getting closer and closer. After what seemed like hours, I stumbled upon an old stone altar covered with incomprehensible inscriptions. As I touched it, an intense white light enveloped me. When I came to, I was back in my truck, on a well-lit and familiar road. Arriving at my destination, I hurried to deliver the cargo and return home. However, what I found on the passenger seat took my breath away, an antique medallion with the name Luzerne engraved on it. I never returned to that route and never found any reference to a town called Luzerne. But every night, in my dreams, I hear the whispering voices of the past calling me back to that place forgotten in time.